As ever in the Eifel Mountains, the weather is going to play its part. It's not snow, it's not rain, but this time it's but that shouldn't bother Bernd Schneider. This weekend has the chance of wrapping up the championship after an excellent last time at the Oschersleben. Rounds 12 and 13 of the German Touring Car Masters marked the series' second visit to the track in eastern Germany, but Joe Winkelhock obviously still hadn't learnt his way through turn one and started a pile-up that won half the field. Marcel Fessler and Michael Bartels were two of the casualties as the red flags were waved and the clean-up began. And Joe wondered just what or who had hit him. At the restart, it was Uwe Altzen in the Opel from Schneider in the Mercedes. They made a break to make it a two-car scrap. Meanwhile, the Audis were having their best race of the season, with Aiello eventually taking a stunning 5th place. But ahead of him, the Opel held off the Mercedes to take the checkered flag. Race 2 looked like it was going the same way, with Altzen again leading Schneider, whilst James Thompson learned about the unyielding Oschersleben wall. And he wasn't the only driver in trouble, as a rare mistake by Uwe Altzen on the dusty surface made way for Schneider's 30th DTM career win. And as Altzen spun his rear wheels in vain, Schneider took his 6th win of the season. So that leaves Schneider with a 59-point lead over Klaus Ludwig and Manuel Reuter in equal second place, with young gun Marcel Fessler in 4th, Winkelhock 5th, and our man Peter Dumbreck still in 6th, just 2 points behind. Reuter, the only man able to stop Schneider becoming champion, but even before he'd found somewhere to stick his chewing gum, Winkelhock had started the qualifying fireworks at the Nürburgring. A broken rear suspension pitched the Opel off the track, but as Joe smoked his way back to the pits, Bernd Schneider was stamping his authority on the qualifying session. The second flying lap proved even faster than the first, but there was a further surprise in store. The young Swiss charger, Marcel Fessler, was on a flyer. Another 0.13 of a second inside Schneider put him on provisional pole. And that was well ahead of his much more experienced AMG teammate Klaus Ludwig, who struggled throughout the qualifying session and finished a lonely 17th. Now the Opels were on the attack, with Uwe Altzen setting the pace inside Fessler's time, but his pole didn't last for long. Bernd Schneider regained the pole for Mercedes, but as he ended his hot lap, ahead of him, Joe Winkelhock was starting his. And what a lap it was! With no lap time on the board after a suspension failure earlier in the session, it was all or nothing. And the result was pole position and a delighted Smoking Joe. So that was qualifying. Now over to Steve for the 2 races.
High in the Eifel Mountains, the Nürburgring is over 1,000 meters above sea level. Unfortunately, the cloud is less than that. That is not fog, that is low cloud. But there are still 42,000 spectators in the grandstand for the first of the 2 heats, with Joe Winkelhock and Manuel Reuter, 2 Opels on the front row of the grid. The first of the Mercedes on row 2, Bernd Schneider, the championship at stake. Uwe Altzen alongside him in his Opel V8 Coupe. Then it's Marcel Thiemann and Marcel Fessler, both in the Mercedes SLKs, row 3 of the grid, ahead of Christian Menzel and Michael Bartels, 7th and 8th. Behind their 2 Opels, the first of the Audi TT Coupes. The Frenchman Laurent Aiello, 9th on the grid, with alongside him the Mercedes of Thomas Jaeger. That's the top 10 completed. Now Eric Hellery in the 11th place Opel and Pedro Lamy 12th in his Mercedes. They're ahead of the Scotsman Peter Dumbreck and Christian Abt in his Audi. Stefano Modena and Timo Scheider line up on row 8 in their 2 Opels, ahead of Klaus Ludwig, the veteran, lined up against Chris Nissen in his Audi TT. And at the back of the grid, the 2 British drivers, James Thompson and Darren Turner, 19th and 20th.
Well, it certainly looks like fog to me, Steve.
Well, very tricky conditions. 22 laps the race is scheduled for. And a very good start from Joe Winkelhock. Gets the slingshot out of the Coca-Cola chicane and down to the Castrol S. It's Winkelhock in the Opel from Manuel Reuter. Uwe Elsen makes it 3 Opels, 1, 2, 3. And Bernd Schneider squeezed down into 4th position. Then it's Bartels, Fessler, Thiemann, Aiello in the Audi down in 8th position. And the car runs wide onto the curb, but all the drivers keep it under control. But Joe Winkelhock extending his advantage right from the start.
Well, after the Oschersleben starts, that really was quite dull, but they went through their line astern very clean, and that's probably the first time we've seen that this year. Of course, it may be nothing to do with the fact that Joe Winkelhock is out front and not able to cause a lot of damage in the midfield.
Well, that's just maybe, but it's Joe Winkelhock at the head of the field at the moment, extending his advantage over Manuel Reuter and Uwe Elsen. Now, Winkelhock, don't forget, still equals second in the championship. He's racing for his points. Laurent Aiello there, making his moves down the field. And further back, Christian Abt and Pedro Lamy, Mercedes versus Audi, going on, big battle going on there at the tail of the field as well. And despite these conditions, there we see it again. Oh, and a big slide there from Pedro Lamy, right across the nose of Christian Abt. But the Bavarian in the yellow Audi runs the Abt Sportline team there, managing to hold off Stefano Modena. And Modena maybe has a few problems there. He's been sliding back down the field in his Opel. Meanwhile, at the head of the field, it's still Winkelhock, Reuter, Elsen. Move being made again there. 7th and 8th places. Aiello and Thiemann, former British touring car champion Laurent Aiello, pushing very hard indeed. And Marcel Thiemann getting demoted the place there in the Mercedes-Benz. But 3 Opels ahead of the man who wants to clinch the championship here. Winkelhock, Reuter, Elsen, Bernd Schneider, 21 laps still to go in this race. The question for me now, Will, is Bernd Schneider holding out here, taking it through to the second race of the 2?
Well, if I was him, I would certainly play a cautious race, because he doesn't need to win the race. He can just score good points and therefore come away with a championship at the end of the day. So he doesn't need to get tangled up with other cars. He can play, as I said, a very steady race. But of course, the other cars around him are going to be pushing very, very hard. So he has to judge it just right.
And down the order there, Darren Turner in the white Mercedes, the yellow Audi of James Thompson, 18th and 19th places now. Peter Dambrecht running in 12th position in his car, closing in on the back there of Christian Menzel. And Menzel with all sorts of problems there. He's hit by Thomas Jaeger there for 9th position. And Menzel now sliding down the order. Peter Dambrecht could be on for a top 10. And there we see Menzel. Well, that is going to be a tyre going to nowhere.
Without a doubt, I think he'll be in the pits with that one. That's smoking a lot, and that'll be cutting through into the sidewall, and probably he'll get a puncture very quickly, and I guess he'll be dropping down through the field.
Peter Dambrecht going past the stricken Christian Menzel there, and there's bumping and boring going on all the way up and down the field. Look down for Marcel Thiemann in his Mercedes now, the bonnet flapping loose on that car, and that is not going to help the car's aerodynamics. Oh, it's gone completely. So, no bonnet on Marcel Thiemann's 8th place car. He's still in hot pursuit, though, with Laurent Aiello in the Audi. Behind him, it's Jaeger at 9th, Kellery 10th. Peter Dambrecht now up in 11th position. And that Mercedes still going quite well with the open engine.
Well, it's not the first time, Steve, we've seen a Mercedes without a bonnet, so whether they have a fixing problem, I don't know. We've certainly seen it in other races during the championship where the bonnets have disappeared, partly due to contact, but maybe they just have a problem fixing the bonnets to the car.
Well, Christian Menzel into the pits, effectively out of the running on this race. They'll get him back into the race, but of course the main thing here now is to keep your car fit for the second race.
Absolutely, Steve, because there's only a 10-minute turnaround time, and that means if you've got any major problems with the car, you're just not going to have time to get them ready for the second race. And here we see a replay of Thiemann coming through the chicane in his bonnetless Mercedes. Very calm, very controlled suspension movement there, but for sure the missing bonnet will give him some aerodynamic deficiencies. What? I'm not sure, but it certainly keep the engine a lot cooler.
Well, I think keeping the engine cool is not a problem at the moment. A distinctly damp and chill feel to the Nürburgring. This, of course, the modern Grand Prix circuit, opened in 1984. Alan Prost won the first Grand Prix here. And, of course, Stefano Modena and Bernd Schneider both race here as Formula One drivers.
It just shows the quality of the field racing in the DTM now. There's a lot of very high-class drivers, some out of Formula One, some out of sports cars, some out of other categories. And there we see one of them out of the race.
Well, that's poor Stefano Modena, parked at the side of the Coca-Cola S, not where you'd normally see a car go off. Now, I'm just wondering if he had a repeat of Winkelhock's problem.
It looks like it, Steve. I think that looks like some sort of suspension problem because he just speared off the track. If he'd been tapped, he'd have probably spun round, but he just speared off at quite an acute angle. And there you can see the back of the car, the suspension has broken, albeit that it's the right rear rather than the left rear that happened with Joe Winkelhock in qualifying.
Well, it could be worrying news for Opel, of course. Winkelhock having a suspension failure in qualifying, now Modena 1 in the race. Meanwhile, Winkelhock still absolutely flying. He set the fastest lap of the race last time out, and it's another fastest lap for Joe Winkelhock. So 2 fastest laps in succession. But now Reuter and Alpsen are going with him, so is Bernd Schneider. They've now opened up a little bit of a gap to Michael Barcel's, then Marcel Fessler, the young charger in the black Mercedes. Still there in 7th place is Laurent Yellow. Tiemann still battling gamely with no bonnet now with Thomas Jaeger's Mercedes, and then Eric Ellery completing the top 10 just ahead of Peter Dambrecht. But the 3 Opels, 1 Mercedes are really pushing hard, and they're a wriggle from Reuter's car. And I'm just wondering whether this very cold, clammy, damp conditions is going to have an effect on tyre wear.
Normally, Steve, the high wear conditions are on a hot day with a very abrasive track, and obviously we haven't got that today, but you can get the same effect where the ambient temperature is down and the track temperature, and the tyre doesn't get up to the right operating temperature and therefore starts to grain, so it's almost the same sort of effect. But I guess the sort of temperatures we're seeing today probably won't see that sort of problem.
Now, just look at this coming out of the Coca-Cola curve, side by side for 3rd place. Bernd Schneider trying to make a move on Uwe Elsen, drops back into his slipstream, but they're running down to the Castrol S now, the first corner, the chicane. And again, Schneider now starting to put the pressure on Uwe Elsen. And Schneider really does need the championship points here. He needs a couple of top 3 results in order to be able to clinch the championship here and now with 2 rounds remaining. But of course, if he gambles and he goes off, it's all going to go to Hockenheim.
Yeah, Schneider's got to play a fairly canny race here. He's got Bartels behind him in an Opel, and behind Bartels is Fassler. He'd be a lot happier if Fassler got in front of Bartels and gave him a bit of protection. He's got to be very careful with Alpsen. Of course, I think if I remember rightly, Alpsen last time here at Nürburgring, when it was wet, very wet, entertained us royally by flying off the circuit on just about every other lap. He doesn't seem to be doing that today, fortunately, but I think on occasion he can be quite wild.
Well, he certainly can, and don't forget that great battle at Oschersleben, 1-all in the aggregate scores there. Uwe Alpsen winning one of the races at Oschersleben. The last race before this one, of course, was the one where Alpsen threw it away and Schneider went through to take victory and set up this championship finale. And Schneider again putting the pressure on. But all the time these two are dogfighting, they're losing contact with Manuel Reuter and Joe Winkelhock. And at the moment, with 3 Opel scoring points and the Mercedes in 4th place, there's an awful lot more yet for Bernd Schneider to do. But if any man can do it, Bernd Schneider can. 2 seasons in Formula 1 with the Zaxby F1 team. That team now moving back into Champ Car racing for year 2001. Bernd Schneider actually was tipped as an outside chance of a driver to go to America, and the rumour is that he's turned it down.
And here we see, in fact, that Fessler has got in front of Bartels, so I guess Schneider will be feeling a little bit happier. But Aiello in the Audi in 7th place is really putting pressure on Bartels, and that's a great performance by the Audi. And you can visibly see, the Audi carrying a lot more mid-corner speed than it did earlier in the season. This really is a testament to the amount of improvement they put into this car over the season. In fact, in real terms, it's improved ahead of the Mercedes and the Opels.
Now look at this, at the head of the field, a new race leader. Manuel Reuter now ahead of Joe Winkelhock. Now I'm just wondering whether Winkelhock scrubbed his tyres a little bit too fast and too early, or whether this is team orders, because Manuel Reuter, of course, the man who can still prevent Schneider from becoming the champion. And there we see it, Will. Now that looks to me like a driver pulling over.
Without a doubt, Steve, that's team tactics, quite clearly a team move. Mind you, if I'd been Joe Winkelhock, I'd have probably made the move in the front of the pit, so everybody would have seen it, including the grandstands, and made it a bit more obvious. But anyway, he's moved over for Manuel Reuter and is now riding shotgun.
And just look at this at the head of the field, though. Manuel Reuter might have an electrical problem, because all of a sudden the headlights flickered and they've gone out. Now, I don't know whether it's going to be a problem for him. It's not a visibility problem for the driver, but of course there is a regulation. If they say you've got to run with lights on, you have to run with lights on.
That's right, Steve, but I think in this case, unless the conditions were particularly bad, it might have just been sort of cautionary advice rather than a mandatory order from the officials. So we'll just have to keep an eye on the pit lane for any official flags.
No, you keep an eye on the pit lane, because I'm keeping an eye on Bernd Schneider. He has been closing up, and at the moment it looks to me like Uwe Alsen is being bottled up behind Joe Winkelhock. And we're heading now for a short break, but stay with us for more of the same action.
Sport on 4 with Stepstone Online Recruitment.
Week 32, and we give our castaways a treat. The new Ultima, Hotpoint's most advanced washing machine ever. Plus a box of Persil 2-layer tablets. With just one set of clothes each, we felt they needed freshening up. The results please everyone.
The Lynx Effect.
Sport on 4 with Stepstone Online Recruitment.
Welcome back to the German Touring Car Masters, and this is Timo Scheider trying to find his way past Klaus Ludwig, 12th and 13th places, and the white car ahead of them is Peter Dumbreck in 11th place, chasing Eric Ellery. So great little battles going on all the way up and down the field. Dumbreck there, 11th place, but we've got the British drivers all down at the back. Why is that, Will?
Not really sure, Steve, but it might be something to do with the fact, of course, the first time that they were here at the Nürburgring, it was very wet, and obviously the setup on the car in wet conditions is entirely different to the dry. And this circuit is quite demanding in terms of setup, because you've got very fast corners and some very slow ones, and obviously fast straights. You've got to get a nice compromise in terms of setup. You've got to get the straight line speed, the balance through the fast corners, and also the traction and the turnability in the slow corners. And it may be that these guys have been struggling trying to get that ultimate setup.
Well, the ultimate setup at the moment has to be that third place man, Bernd Schneider. Look at him side by side across the line, down into the Castrol S. Alsen's not giving way, but Schneider's taking it anyway. Nice one.
A very clean move there by Schneider, but you just felt as though Alsen could possibly have held on round the outside and made it very difficult for Schneider. But I guess Alsen is also very aware that he doesn't want to tangle with the championship leader.
Well, we're just over half distance in the race now, and we're seeing the usual form book here for Bernd Schneider. Schneider was always a steady driver in the early stages of the races, then he seems to light up at about half distance. You can see him now really piling the pressure on Joe Winkelhock. Joe, of course, a storming start, went like crazy for 5 or 6 laps. He's been losing pace. Now, I'm just wondering here, two different strategies, maybe Schneider preserving his car for later in the race?
For sure, Steve, they're diametrically opposed races so far. Joe went out like a bat out of hell, pushed very, very hard, and Schneider throughout the whole season has always been very patient in races when he's been behind other cars. He just sat there and waited. In the second half of the race, he's piled on the pressure, and in so doing has always managed to find a gap or create a gap by forcing the car in front of him to make a slight mistake or something, and it seems to be exactly what's happening here.
So what actually happens when you've been pushing a car very hard in the early stages? How does it differ from the car that's been eased through it?
Well, it's really a question of a tyre wear, and clearly Joe has pushed his tyres a bit harder than Schneider, and Schneider's been looking after his tyres, and maybe there's just a little bit more rubber. They haven't been pushed quite so hard in particularly coming out of the slow corners where you're asking for a lot of traction, and maybe that's where Schneider's going to gain, and possibly you'll see him getting past out of a slow corner. And here you see him just having a go at Joe, not quite enough, but again he just managed to carry a little bit more speed out of that corner, but Joe got the pedal to the metal and just hold him off.
Well, Joe Winkelhock fighting a great defensive action against Schneider. Meanwhile, Manuel Reuter extending his advantage, and Marcel Fessler in the black Mercedes, there he is, starting to close in now on the 4th place, Uwe Alsen. It may be cold, damp and misty outside, but I guess it is absolutely red hot in every one of these cars. As Schneider comes down across the start-finish line now, down into that second gear chicane, the Castrol S, 90 degrees to the right, 90 degrees to the left, and it's going to go wheel to wheel between two of the hard men of touring cars. Bernd Schneider manages to pull it off. Winkelhock loses momentum now, and Uwe Alsen goes down the inside of him. But it's now down to the Ford curve, the left, then the right, and taking advantage of that, Marcel Fessler closing in as well, and Winkelhock down to fourth place. It may well be down to fifth, because Fessler gets his nose alongside at the back now of these 5 cars, and Winkelhock shuffles down to the back of the pack.
Poor old Joe, second to fifth, but I have to say I would have thought he would have defended a bit harder into the Castrol S curve, because it was almost as though, here we see it, it's almost as though he doesn't see Schneider coming down the inside, and bearing in mind how close Schneider was, I would have expected that, and Joe just didn't get the car across and to cover Schneider coming down the inside, and because he suddenly realised too late, it unsettled him, and then he's lost 2 more places.
Now this is interesting. Bernd Schneider now going for the lead. Now this man has the championship at stake. Either he has the ultimate in self-confidence, or he is going bonkers. Right up now on the tail of Manuel Reuter, and the Mercedes once again the fastest car in the closing stages of a race here. 17 laps now completed, 5 laps still to go, and Bernd Schneider is pushing Manuel Reuter every inch of the way.
Of course, Steve, it might be that Reuter on the previous lap had a couple of Opels between him and the Mercedes of Schneider, but now suddenly he's got a Mercedes breathing down his back, and it may be a bit of a wake-up call, because he was quite happy there with a bit of a cushion, and now he's obviously got to push himself much harder.
Well, it's an interesting strategy, because the other alternative, of course, is if he slows down, it allows the other 2 Opels to potentially catch up and bundle the way past.
Exactly. What he really needs now, what Reuter really needs, is for Alsen to really push hard and latch himself onto Schneider's bumper and put Schneider under pressure. But we very rarely see Schneider coming under pressure in the second part of a race during this, particularly during this championship season.
Interesting there, watching him on the downhill right-hander through the RTL curve. The car there, the Opel, not turning in quite as cleanly. Let's watch here again. You can see the Mercedes goes up to the curb on the inside much more cleanly.
I think that's something we've seen all season, the characteristic of the Mercedes. I think the Opel is particularly good in the tight bends, whereas Mercedes does struggle a bit. But what Mercedes is good at is under braking, and that's a corner there. You come down that hill, it's downhill braking very, very hard to get the car slowed down and turned in. And that's one area where the Mercedes is very strong.
But Manuel Reuter, perhaps the second most experienced man after Bernd Schneider at the front this season in these new V8 engine cars. Don't forget, we have the most experienced man running right down at the back of the field. Klaus Ludwig's team just not able to get his car to handle cleanly at all around this circuit. And I guess some of it also is about development times of these cars. Mercedes had their car on the track right away from January this year. Did lots of testing miles here at the Nürburgring. Opel's car was a little bit later. They lost out perhaps on a month of test running. Audi, of course, only got their car out in time for the first race, and that's why they've been fighting from the back.
Certainly, Steve, testing time is absolutely vital in developing these cars, and because testing is limited during the season, if you get that testing done during the winter, then that's going to pay big dividends during the race season, and clearly the teams that have had the most testing have been at the front. But of course, then it's broken down. There we see Alfred, the head of the AMG operation, looking quite serious, considering he's got a potential championship winner.
Looking pretty cold.
And cold. And but obviously it's then down to the individual teams and drivers to come up with the optimum setup, and that's why you're seeing perhaps Ludwig not having a particularly good race. He's got a poor setup in an AMG Mercedes, whereas Schneider is right at the front.
Schneider at the moment very much at the front, keeping the pressure on Manuel Reuter. And I've got to say, one of the drives of the race, Marcel Fessler there in that black Mercedes, 4th position, right up on the tail of Uwe Alsen. This was a man who'd never even sat in one of these German touring car races at the start of this season.
He's had a really classy season and is clearly a find for touring cars and for Mercedes. Some drivers suit touring cars and some don't. Some struggle with the sort of whole concept of a heavy car with lots of high up weight when they've been perhaps been used to single-seaters with low down weight and very light cars which handle very differently and have aerodynamic, a lot more aerodynamics. So he really has done very well, and he's generally finished races pretty high up, and he had a very good start to the season, perhaps had a slightly bad patch in the middle, but again he's looking to come in good. And here we see, I think it's Eric Hellery just losing it. In fact, we've seen very few cars lose it during this race, and it looks like it just got away from him. Got on the gas a bit too soon.
Well, Eric Hellery, sadly, his loss though Good news is it's Peter Dumbreck's gain, because Peter Dumbreck now up into the top 10. Meanwhile, Bernd Schneider still content there just to sit comfortably, harrying away there. And you can see those lap times now just starting to drop away. Perhaps a function of the car's tyres, the car's brakes getting a little bit tired into the closing pair of laps.
Without a doubt, Steve, everything's getting a bit tired now, and you have to drive and adapt your driving style accordingly. But coming back to Fassler, of course, and we mustn't forget Dumbreck, as you just mentioned. Dumbreck has also been the find of the season in that respect. He's driven extremely well. He's lying 6th in the championship, and he has put together some great races. He's another driver who's really taken to touring cars, German touring cars, like a duck to water.
Through then the Vidal S up to the Coca-Cola curve. The closing stages of the penultimate lap. 21 laps now completed for the race leader. This is the 22nd and final lap. 4.5 kilometers left to see whether Bernd Schneider's going to settle for that second place. As the cloud gets thicker, the fog gets deeper. Up on the start-finish line now as the cars drop down into the valley. You'll see the visibility improve just a little, but that is no problem for Bernd Schneider, still in that second place. He's got the big white Opel ahead of him. Meanwhile, behind him, Uwe Elsen, a late spurt from Uwe, is maybe just going to spoil this one, because he may well squeeze that Opel back through into second place and ruin Bernd Schneider's point-scoring party.
I think Schneider's got this race well under control. He knows what he's got to do. He's kept it very clean throughout. He's been very aware of what's going on behind him and in front, and I think he's just going to stroke it home to a championship win.
Great view there of Bernd Schneider, relaxed at the wheel, almost sitting on the back seat of the Mercedes. They're so far back in these cars. Got to make room for that big, long V8 engine, of course. And the Opels, too, running that V8 engine. Very, very distinctive, crackling exhaust note from the Opel coupes. But through now the final sequence of corners, and it's Manuel Reuter, and almost forgotten because he has driven such a clean and precise and relatively undramatic race since taking over the lead from Joe Winkelhoff. Manuel Reuter really has stamped his authority on the Opel effort this year, and it's well deserved, this running to the checkered flag. Final time from the Vidal S now up to the Coca-Cola curve, down through the final sequence of corners, and the Mercedes team almost looking as if they're celebrating a victory. They're up on the pit wall as the Opel crosses the line, and the Opel team are there too. A big thumbs up from Opel Motorsport was Holger Streisek. Manuel Reuter takes victory. Bernd Schneider a fine second place, and what a race that was in atrocious conditions. Manuel Reuter, Bernd Schneider, followed by Uwe Elsen and Marcel Fessler, the young Swiss. Joe Winkelhoff fighting his way back down to 5th, and Michael Bartels in 6th. Well, there may just be 19 cars on the grid for the next race. Stefano Modeno's car, we saw that car have that rear suspension breakage. Frantic work going on with the Euro Racing team in the pit lane, trying to replace it. Now, they've got that 10-minute window before the cars retake their places on the grid. After that, they can start from the pit lane. But at the moment, poor old Stefano Modena looks as if he might well be sitting this race out. Not for a lack of effort from the team. Stalwart race fans, as the weather conditions, would you believe it, they're actually getting worse. And Modena is not one of the cars heading out onto the warm-up lap. Well, that's not going to help the visibility any either, as the smoke bombs go off for Manuel Reuter and Bernd Schneider, starting this race in the finishing order from the last. Row 2 of the grid, Uwe Elsen and Marcel Fessler. That'll be an interesting battle into the first corner. And 5th and 6th places on the grid, Joe Winkelhock and Michael Bartels. Thomas Jaeger and Pedro Lamy line up in their 2 Mercedes, 7th and 8th on the grid, and completing the top 10, the best of the Audis, Laurent Yellow in 9th, and Peter Dumbreck, the Flying Scot. Timo Scheider in his Opel lines up on row 6 alongside the veteran Klaus Ludwig, the most experienced driver in the championship, with Darren Turner just behind him, and Eric Hellery in his Opel. And filthy weather conditions as the cars run flat out down into the Castrol S, and it's Manuel Reuter, but who is going to be alongside him as they appear out of the murk? It's Reuter in the lead. Bernd Schneider, it's 3 abreast, it's an Audi up into 4th place briefly. Laura Aiello from 9th place on the grid, and somebody's in trouble. Timo Scheider does a complete 360. Ludwig and Menzel are delayed. Scheider is stationary on the outside of the S. And Joe Winkelhock is the man who's lost out in that melee. The order is Reuter, Schneider, Elsen, Fassler, Aiello. and Joe Winkelhock is right down in the pack.
That was almost bound to happen after the first start, where we saw everybody go through line abreast, very calm, very tidy. This time it was 2 abreast, sometimes 3 abreast, and clearly there was going to be a bit of mayhem in the middle. Poor old Scheider lost out there. He was very lucky not to get collected by another car, but of course he delayed 1 or 2 cars behind him, and in particular, as you said, Joe, who's now down, I think, in 9th place.
Well, there's Winkelhock's red car, a big twitch there from the Audi of James Thompson. He's driving it 10 out of 10 for effort, but the Audi doesn't want to go around the corners. Meanwhile, at the head of the field, it's Reuter from Schneider. Now, this is good news for Mercedes, because Bernd Schneider in 2nd place means that Bernd Schneider will become the 2000 champion. But he's got Alson, Fessler, Aiello and Jaeger. All might have something to do with it over the next 21 laps.
But you're saying Audis don't go around corners. Aiello's car is certainly going around corners extremely well, running up in 5th place. It was fantastic performance by Aiello, great start. And now putting pressure on Fessler in front of him, although Jaeger, I guess, is latched to his bumper.
Now, if you use the yellow car as the landmark in the mist, look just behind them. It's Lamy, then Bartels, and then Peter Dumbreck now in 9th place with Joe Winkelhock in 10th. But these conditions, well, if you thought they couldn't get worse, they are getting thicker and mistier and murkier. And if you're wondering why you haven't seen any of our regular in-car coverage, the reason for that is we normally require a helicopter to bounce the signal from the cars back to the broadcast station. The helicopter can't fly, so we can't get in-car pictures. But the on-track action is still absolutely red hot. Darren Turner making progress up through the field. Darren started this race down in 13th place. He's already up into the top 10 as we see a replay of the chaos at the first corner.
Yeah, there's poor Scheider doing his 360. I guess he's shutting his eyes as he goes round and round, hoping no car hits him. Poor old James Thompson there having to take to the gravel to avoid the spinning Scheider.
Meanwhile, the Audi TT still running very well indeed. Laurent Aiello really driving the wheels off that yellow car. James Thompson recovering well now. The best of the 3 Audis running at the tail of the pack. Eddie Christensen and Christian Abt. But at the head of the field, it's still Manuel Reuter holding on. But Bernd Schneider now piling the pressure on. And behind Schneider, we still have that 3rd place Opel of Uwe Alson. And Alson's strategy now surely must be to try and pressurise Schneider into a mistake, and that's exactly what he's doing. Oh, and contact there at the front of the Opel, back of the Mercedes. You can't get much closer than that.
No, really, Alson had to absolutely slam on the anchors there, because he was, if he'd another couple of millimetres or 2, and he'd have punted Schneider right off the circuit. I think he got a bit of surprise that Schneider shut the door so firmly.
Bernd Schneider really now has to defend, and again Schneider taking a very defensive run down into the Castrol S. And once again it's this role play that we see. The Mercedes is slow in the early stages of the race. The Opels are all over him like a rash. The question is, will that change at the end of 22 laps?
But the danger Schneider now faces is, of course, that if he blocks and holds up the Opels behind him, you know, he's going to create an incident where he's going to get hit and possibly will go off the circuit and maybe not finish. And there we see Hellery, who's now stopped. That was some bodywork damage from earlier in the race, and that looks fairly terminal, maybe a damaged radiator or something, and his race is run.
Well, Eric Hellery then out of the race, but the big battle still on at the head of the field. Klaus Ludwig, he's really having a miserable race this weekend. The most experienced driver, the winningest driver, if you can use that term, in the German Touring Car Championship, the German Touring Car Masters. And this is the track that Klaus Ludwig really does call home. He actually has a hunting lodge in the mountains up above the circuit, so he'd really like to perform well here. Meanwhile, Manuel Reuter and Bernd Schneider. Bernd Schneider, of course, a Monegasque resident. He has a little bit of a commute to do, but Bernd Schneider doesn't let that one stop him from pushing very hard indeed. Hans-Werner Aufrecht, not far down the road in Stuttgart. The boss of AMG, the tuning firm that builds and prepares all the Mercedes cars for the German Touring Car Masters, looks on. Is his man going to make it to the championship? It's a bit of a cliffhanger. Marcel Fessler again, the young Swiss, still there in that 4th place as Uwe Alson takes another look down the inside of Bernd Schneider, and again the Opel's advantage through the and contact and off on the outside of the Castrol S, and Bernd Schneider very lucky to keep it on the track.
I would say, actually, Steve, that was very good driving by Schneider, because after contact had happened between him and Alson, he could easily have speared off to the right-hand side, but he got the car under control. He came off the gas, probably modulated the brake pedal, and just kept the car on the edge of the track and recovered. Great driving by Schneider.
But problems for Uwe Alsen there at the back of our shot. Smoke coming from the back of his car. Meanwhile, the order now, Reuter still leads. Marcel Fessler, that young Swiss driver, up into second place. Thomas Jaeger third. Let's have another look at this.
Alsen is just about far enough alongside. It's touch and go, and Schneider perhaps should have known he was there, but he was being very obstinate up to then, Schneider. He was blocking Alsen for 2 or 3 laps, and it was almost inevitable, you'd think, that some sort of contact was going to happen, and for sure it did.
And this is very bad news. A replay here of an incident with Pedro Lamy and Klaus Ludwig. And Ludwig, we were just saying he'd like to have performed well on his home track. I'm afraid he's walking home. We're taking a short break now, but stay with us. Plenty more action from the German Touring Car Masters. Welcome back. The German Touring Car Masters. Thomas Jaeger ahead of Uwe Alsen, who's recovering despite throwing smoke from the front tyres. Their bodywork obviously rubbing on the rubber, but it's still 4th place for Uwe Alsen. And Bernd Schneider is down in 5th. Now, 5th place is not good enough for Bernd Schneider to become champion. It may still go to the final round, but don't forget, he's got 1 Opel ahead of him, then 2 Mercedes, then race leader Reuter. And there you can see that front-end damage on Uwe Alsen's Opel. And if he can get past Alsen, I'm pretty sure the other 2 Mercedes would disappear in the mist to let him score the points.
I've no doubt, Steve. I'm sure one of the Mercedes would happily drive off the track to help Schneider in his quest to win the championship. Interesting enough, talking about Alsen and the damaged tyre, when as a driver you know you've got some tyre smoke, because you can always sometimes see it and sometimes you can just smell it. It is always very worrying, particularly on a high-speed circuit like this, because if the tyre were to go at high speed, obviously you could have a fairly big accident. So you're very wary for 2 or 3 laps until it settles down. Normally, if it's not a problem, it'll disappear during that those 2 or 3 laps, and you'll be able to complete the race. But it certainly is a worrying time.
Now, we saw Manuel Reuter there, fastest lap, 166 kilometres an hour. Just imagine driving in fog this thick at 100 miles an hour. Now do it round the twistiest and the tightest circuit high in the mountains of the Eifel range. That is the challenge for all of these drivers.
Mind you, Steve, nothing like the old Nordschleife, the 14.5-mile circuit with 170 corners. Now, that was a real challenge. And when they built this circuit, everybody thought what a terrible track it was, because it just had no character compared to the great Nordschleife. And I've raced on the Nordschleife, and it is just the most unbelievable circuit. But having said that, this is a very challenging circuit in its own right. It's got some 1 or 2 really great corners, and sometimes it produces really sparkling races.
Now, we spoke about Joe Winkelhock, started this race in 5th position. He got bundled down to the tail of the pack. He's now back up into 7th, ahead of Michael Bartels, Darren Turner and Peter Dumbrek, 9th and 10th now, then Christian Menzel. And Joe Winkelhock's got past all of them. And whoa, a good old battle here. Peter Dumbrek keeping the door closed on Christian Menzel, almost tailgates Darren Turner.
Yeah, Darren Turner had a bit of a wobble there as he got onto the brakes. He almost looks like he'd locked his rear brakes. Maybe has to change the balance on his brakes as his tyres begin to wear. And that's certainly something drivers have to do during these sort of races, where the tyre wear increases during the race and you've got to change the balance from front to rear or from rear to front.
Now keep an eye on the top of your screens in the mist. We're watching race leader Manuel Reuter, but behind him, Bernd Schneider, currently 5th, is closing on 4th place Uwe Alsen. Joe Winkelhock, currently 7th, is closing on Laurent Aiello in the Audi. So there's everything to play for yet. Manuel Reuter still the race leader from the 2 Mercedes young guns, Marcel Fessler and Thomas Jaeger. There you can see Bernd Schneider closing in on the back of Alsen and going down the inside, and a superbly judged manoeuvre. And really, Alsen there did not want to defend.
Fair enough, Steve. I still think it was a stunning move by Schneider, because what he did, he carried massively more speed out of the RTL corner and really was never really going to make it through the bit curve, the next corner, unless he'd really got hard on the brakes. But by doing that, he managed to take the line from Alsen and stole a corner. He slowed both cars up, but it meant he got through.
Great driving then from Bernd Schneider. Now, interesting, Bernd Schneider now in 4th position, is now in a position where he'll score enough championship points to be ahead of Reuter. He'll have more than the 40 points available in the final 2 rounds of the championship, and if he stays in this position, he will be the 2000 German Touring Car Master. But Manuel Reuter, really, well, he needs to try and drop the pace, get rid of a couple of those Mercedes from behind him and get some of the Opels up there. Now, Will, one of the things, though, these conditions are getting worse. I'm just wondering whether the race will run the full 22 laps. And also, just what is it like doing these sort of speeds with no visibility?
Well, the key factor in whether the race continues or not, of course, is whether the marshals can see each other from post to post. If you can do that, then normally conditions are okay, because it means that you can see a waved yellow flag or stationary flag or whatever, and sufficient. So it's a question of safety, and it does look as though it's okay. These telephoto shots are probably making it look a little bit worse than it actually is, but driving in these conditions, certainly fog is not very pleasant to drive in, because you just don't get the same light, you don't get the same you don't pick up on the same reference points, and it just makes it that much more difficult. I've certainly driven in some tricky foggy conditions, particularly at Le Mans, actually, in the sort of the Sunday morning. You get fog patches on the Mulsanne Straight, and that really is quite scary. You're going to blankets of white fog and you can't see anything at speeds of sort of 200 miles an hour. But the real exponents of driving the fog are, of course, rally drivers who drive like complete maniacs in sort of complete whiteout conditions. And my very limited experience of rallying, and when I've driven in the fog, has been absolutely terrifying. I've just no idea how they do it.
Well, out of the mist for Bernd Schneider, across the line there, completing 17 laps, 5 laps still to go. Let's have another look at that overtaking move.
Yeah, here you see, slingshot move out of the RTL curve, carrying massive more speed. Wouldn't better carry that sort of speed through the next corner, but he compromises Altzen. Altzen can't get the line he wants and slows both cars up, but manages to get through. It was really a very, very good move.
Now, interesting there watching Manuel Reuter, and this is the apex of the corner there by a good foot, and I'm just wondering whether he's starting now. He's been working those tyres very hard right since the start of that race, and I'm just wondering now whether that 6.5 second gap, bear in mind those two Mercedes between the Opel and Bernd Schneider's car could almost evaporate. Those team orders could easily get them to slow down and Bernd Schneider to thunder his way through. Here is Bernd Schneider. And Manuel Reuter really does have a bit of a problem. Not half as much of a problem as Laura Aiello has, though, because Joe Winkelhock has been driving the wheels off that car, and as always in Joe Winkelhock fashion, he's now stormed his way up onto the tail of the next car, and he's gone quicker as he has the challenge ahead of him.
And there in the background, Dunbreck having a huge, lurid tail slide. But yeah, Joe's done really well. He's done the opposite he did in the first race, where he started slow and then has got quicker during the race. And he's putting a lot of pressure on Aiello here. And he's obviously saved his tyres well, and he's now running. And here he is diving down into the inside of the Coca-Cola curve, the last curve on this circuit, cleanly through into 6th place.
Great drive by Joe Winkelhock. Now, let's watch Joe. He's got the Audi out of the way. Is he going to be able to close up on that lead group? Well, he's certainly closing in on Bernd Schneider. And this could well be exactly what Bernd Schneider did not want. He's got Uwe Altzen and Joe Winkelhock right behind him. Either of those two drivers could make it very difficult indeed for him. There's Bernd Schneider. There you can see Altzen. Then Winkelhock now ahead of that Audi. And just watch Winkelhock's aggression through the S's here. Altzen still keeping it tidy. He must still have that vibrating, thrumming front tyre rubbing on that bodywork, which must be worrying him still. But he is keeping his race together. Meanwhile, Joe Winkelhock, again, don't forget, he's also driving for points here. He needs to recover a few championship points. Puff of smoke there, locks the front wheel. He is right on the limit.
He certainly is, and that's a lovely shot there as they come through that S curve after the Dunlop hairpin at the bottom of the circuit. The cars are really flying through there, floating over those curves. It really is a fantastic shot, and just shows how hard the drivers are still pushing so late in the race.
Well, Bernd Schneider must be now trying to keep his mind on the track. Is he going to be the champion? Don't forget his experience of being champion. He was the German touring car master back in 1995. 1997, the FIA GT champion, also driving for Mercedes. So he's no stranger to holding the champion's mantle. But meanwhile, he has to keep his cool. And again, you can see the car giving a big hop there as it comes through the Vidal S. And maybe the shock absorber's starting to get a bit tired. There's a big bump there in the middle of the Vidal S. Throws the car offline. And now Schneider, nice and tidy, keeping it cool. And Winkelhock at the moment still got airspace between himself and Uwe Altzen. Bessler, Jaeger, second and third places. Then comes Bernd Schneider, and Uwe Altzen has closed back up on Bernd Schneider. Now, is this Schneider dropping his pace, or is this the Opels on the attack in the closing stages?
I'm sure Schneider has got the race under control as far as he's concerned. He knows he's got to stay in that position, and I guess he's spending a lot of time just keeping an eye on Altzen in his mirror. We know the sort of race he drives. He looks after his tyres, and I'm sure he's got a little bit in hand if he needs it.
And again, Manuel Reuter missing that apex by a country mile.
There's no doubt his tyres are a little bit more worn now, but I don't think it's a real problem, Steve, because he's got a bit of a gap to the second place man, and then funny enough there's sort of 1 or 2 lines through that Dunlop curve, and he's certainly under no pressure from anybody behind, so he can perhaps experiment a bit and run a bit wide.
Well, closing stage of the race now, just 2 laps still to go. Reuter from Fessler, Jaeger, then Uwe Altzen in pursuit still of Bernd Schneider, the car with the yellow mirrors. But look behind them, because Joe Winkelhock really is hanging the tail out in that Opel Astra. He is determined to get on terms. Nice big gap back from Fessler and Jaeger to Bernd Schneider. And with 3 Mercedes all together, this is going to be enough championship points for Bernd Schneider, I am sure. Behind these two, because Joe Winkelhock now, watch through the Vidal S here. No, we don't get a chance to see him this time. He's near as damn it, straight lining it.
Joe's certainly spectacular when he wants to be, as we all saw at the Oschersleben, but he's a driver full of character, and if everything's going for him, then he can really wring the best out of a car.
Well, completion of lap 20, 22 laps in the race. Reuter, Fessler, Jaeger, Schneider, Altzen, Winkelhock there closing in, then comes Lauriello, and another good result for the Audi team. They've really had to work very hard from a late start to the season. It's not a full factory-supported team, unlike Opel and Mercedes-Benz, so perhaps they have significantly less funding, but they have really worked hard to get the Audi on the pace. Meanwhile, Manuel Reuter still heading into the closing stages, the last 10 kilometres now as the race leader.
The other issue about Aiello, of course, and the Audi apt team is that where you do have problems in terms of developing the car, it sometimes pays to concentrate on just one car and one drive, and possibly that's what we're seeing, because it's better to have one car well up there than trying to get 4 cars up there.
Well, let's have a look again through the Vidal S. You can see there, Bernd Schneider, very accurate. Winkelhock throwing his car through, and look how Winkelhock's come up on the tail of Uwe Altzen. I reckon this could still run and run. They're heading on now to the last lap of the race, and I reckon Winkelhock's on for a charge.
He certainly is charging, and there's Altzen moving across to defend his 5th place, and it looks like Joe's got him. Joe's got him on outside of the corner as they approach the Castrol S.
There's Bernd Schneider, he is in 4th place. Winkelhock now all the way around the outside of Uwe Altzen. And I'm just wondering here whether there's a bit of strategy. If you've got one Opel that's quicker than the other two, are you going to put them in to try and force Schneider into a defensive action on this last lap?
Very difficult. Looks like Joe's got a bit too much ground to make up. But mind you, with the way Joe's been straight lining some of the corners, if he went across the grass sufficiently, he could probably make up that gap.
Well, don't forget, if Schneider drops from 4th to 5th place, he doesn't clinch the championship. It gives Manuel Reuter the theoretical chance of taking it into the final rounds at the Hockenheim. But at the moment, Manuel Reuter is heading for victory. There's nothing he can do other than go like crazy and see that checkered flag. But meanwhile, behind him, the battle really now on for that 4th position. And it's Bernd Schneider versus Joe Winkelhock. And Winkelhock is closing indeed on Bernd Schneider. Meanwhile, we stay with race leader Manuel Reuter. Has led it literally from the very first corner of this race. Superb result for the Opel team. And the Team Phoenix, Manuel Reuter's team, preparing to celebrate on the pit wall, led by Volker Streichek, as through the final sequence of corners for the final time. Watch out for the checkered flag on the left. It waves for Manuel Reuter, winner at the Nürburgring. A fine 2nd place for young Marcel Fessler. Thomas Jaeger, the 2nd young gun, 3rd. But Bernd Schneider crosses the line now to the delight of the Mercedes-Benz fans. The klaxons blare in the grandstand. Mission accomplished for Hans-Werner Aufrecht. AMG Mercedes are the 2000 champions, and this man, Bernd Schneider, is the Deutsche Tourenwagen master. Manuel Reuter, Marcel Fessler, Thomas Jaeger, the top 3. But off the podium, it's going to be Bernd Schneider spraying the champagne too, with Joe Winkelhock and Uwe Altzen keeping it down to the last. Well, the champagne sprays for Reuter, Fessler and Jaeger on the podium, but it is a new champion. The 2000 German touring car master goes to Bernd Schneider.
Round number